The upper limit problem is the human tendency to sabotage ourselves when things start going better. Make friends with your fear. The two questions I always ask people to help people figure out what their real genius is number one, what do you most love to do? The secret of happiness is knowing that there are some things you can control and some things you cannot control. The zone of excellence is you're doing stuff you're good at, you get paid well for it, you get a lot of girls and boys, but it's not ultimately satisfying. But the problem is,
this book had an impact on me, particularly when you talked about some of the stuff we're going to get into today, like the upper limit problem and, how that kind of translates to self-sabotage and ultimately keeps you stuck where you are. And I have so many listeners, so many viewers out there that are trying to make, big moves in their life to just break free from their current confines or where they are in life. And they want to do big things. And so that's why I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have. So before anything else, I just want to say thanks for coming on the show, Gay.
My pleasure, Josh.
So if I were to ask you, what you would want the audience to take away by the end of this conversation, what would that be?
Well, I can think of two things right away. One is I'd like everybody to be able to spot when they're operating out of a limiting belief. I'd like people to know when they're limited so they can then make a shift to unlimit themselves. And so I want everybody to have a working knowledge of the upper limit problem, how to spot it, how to get out from under it. And the second thing is, after you've kind of unhooked your upper limit problems, how to live in your genius zone. To me, every human being has a gold mine, a uranium mine, a whatever kind of mine inside themselves that's connected to infinite creativity. And how we know that is, look at us. I mean, we're amazing instruments that's taken millions and millions of years to create. And so we need to take full advantage of the excellent equipment we've been given. I always say that it's like we're given a Learjet at birth, but we use it to plow potato fields with, up and down the potato field, and don't realize what its true potential is. And so I've spent the last 50 years of my life and career writing books about and helping people, and particularly businesses, work through what their upper limit is and how to lift that as an individual or as a team or as a business so that they can go into what I consider their true potential, which is their genius zone, what they most love to do, what is their biggest contribution. So I think having access to your genius and how to unhook your upper limit problem are the two things that I'd really love people to come away with.
That sounds great. Let's start there. Hey guys, today's episode is sponsored by BITNW Academy. That's Blue is the New White Academy. And yes, this is my company, but I wanted to take just a second to explain what it is and why we're so excited about it. We created BITNW Academy as an online self-paced learning platform specifically for people in the blue-collar home and commercial service space. That means that you as a CEO, entrepreneur, or business owner in the blue-collar industries can deploy this as an employee development tool for your team to teach them those ever-important soft skills like communication and leadership and conflict resolution and initiative, the things that truly drive teamwork and culture. There's also an element we created to teach business acumen, financial acumen, so they understand how their actions on a day-to-day basis impact the bottom line of your organization. We've created some resources around this as well, one of which I want to give to you today for free. It's our 90-day ROI playbook that shows you how to increase the value of every technician on your staff by up to $30,000 or more without increasing prices, revenue, or gaining new customers simply by deploying these soft skills strategically. I'll put the link in the description for the show. Check it out if you get a chance. For somebody who might not know at all what you're talking about, haven't read the book, haven't followed your work, what is the upper limit problem?
The upper limit problem is the human tendency to sabotage ourselves when things start going better. So, a classic example of that is you start a new project and then something happens and takes you off the course. So that's a common upper limit problem, is the off the course drift. Another upper limit problem is getting sick. A lot of people plan something really big and then the night before they come up with a sore throat or get sick in some way. Another upper limit problem is accidents. Something good happens in your life and you don't know how to deal with that. And so you stub your toe or break your leg or get sick. So the upper limit problem is anything you use to put the brakes on yourself, to limit yourself from going all the way to your full potential. And in the Big Leap, I show that all upper limit problems are rooted in fear. And if you can understand and unhook 3 or 4 main fears that human beings have, you are better able to soar into the higher stratosphere of your full potential.
Amazing. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions surrounding that. So, number one, how do you respond when somebody inevitably comes to you and says, Gay, I see this, you're talking about getting sick and stubbing my toe as a form of self-sabotage. Can't that just be a coincidence? Like, is there really a correlation there?
Well, yes, and it could certainly be a coincidence. However, what you start looking for is themes. Have this happened before? And almost everybody that sits down in here in this very office that I'm talking to you from can identify, if they look back and start tracing carefully, they can see where they wandered off the course or where they stopped listening to themselves or where they got the upper limit problem for. You see, one of the big upper limit problems is the underlying feeling that you don't deserve the good things of life. And so if you have that I don't deserve it mentality, that's oftentimes traced back to your family life, and sometimes to your grandparents. Sometimes we come from a whole family lineage of people who didn't really fulfill their full potential. And so I think that one of the first things we need to do to be a successful human being is take on the journey to your genius as your big quest in life, that your big quest is to really find out what your true genius is and how to express it in the world. And the 2 questions I always ask people to help people figure out what their real genius is number 1, what do you most love to do? Like if you could spend all day long doing something, whatever it is, a lot of people think of a surface thing. Oh, I'd drink Pepsi all day, or I'd eat chocolate bars all day, or I'd make love all day. But those aren't really things that will give you the steady state life satisfaction because they're not designed to do that. They're designed to be a short-term distraction or to take your mind off the fact that you're hungry or something like that. So what we need to do is make a major commitment to our whole life journey toward genius, to finding out, who am I? What do I most love? What do I love to do in the world? And then the second question is, what do you love to do that has a big impact, positive impact on the life of other people? What do you do that makes other people's lives better? What is your biggest contribution you want to make to life? Now, one of my old mentors way back 50 years ago was Abraham Maslow. And he said, it doesn't matter if you make a genius soup that feeds 5 people or write a genius novel that 5 million people read. It's calling forth the best of you. So you don't need a large audience for your genius. You need to find out what you really love to do and what your biggest contribution is. Maybe your biggest contribution is raising your two kids and making sure they have a good home. Maybe your biggest contribution, you don't have kids, maybe your biggest contribution feels like supporting your extended family. Well, all of those things are beautiful things, but what we really need to do is get underneath all of that and make sure that the life we live is in harmony with what we love to do and what makes our biggest contribution. Because all the time I work with people who have not answered that question at age 40 or 50 or sometimes 70 or even 80. And so they come here to try to answer a question that really was going on in the background for the last 40 years.
Wow, there's a lot there. And I think that's one of the biggest impacts the book made on me, when you framed it that way, because, well, we'll get to it, you alluded to it by talking a little bit about the zone of genius. We'll talk a little bit about the zone of excellence and what the difference is between the two. Before we get into that, you had mentioned that there's these upper limit problems are rooted in 3 or 4 fears. Can you help us understand what those 3 or 4 fears are?
Yes, the first one, the most prevalent one I mentioned, it's the fear that I'm fundamentally flawed in some way because I'm the wrong height or I'm the wrong skin color or I don't speak the right language or I was born in the wrong country. All of those kinds of things may be factors, but they're really not the central factor, which is that all of us have a potential that most of us never even think about or wonder about or open up. We just go through the life that's been kind of measured out for us. But I can tell you that doesn't bring satisfaction. The only thing that really brings satisfaction is participating in the good things of life. And if you don't feel like you deserve that, there's always a good reason for it, because of your background and so forth. But it's up to each one of us to make that shift and say, wait a minute, I see why I believe that, but I'm going to let that belief fly out the window. It's not made of anything. It's not connected to anything. I'm going to take on a new piece of software, which is I deserve the good things of life. And not even that you deserve them necessarily, but that it's okay for you to have them. And so that's number one. Number 2 fear is a fear that I don't deserve the spotlight. I must stay in the shadows. I can support people in the spotlight, but the light isn't for me. Well, I want everybody to overcome that and become the star of their own life. And the reason for that is if you're always thinking of other people as the stars and your job is to support them, well, that's good for a while, but I can guarantee you that martyrs are never happy. People that live their whole life to support others and don't ever look into their own potential, it leads to a lot of depression and unhappiness. And so I think the main thing that we need to do first is overcome these big fears. So, number 1, the fear that I'm unworthy, don't deserve the good things of life. Number 2, the fear that I don't deserve the spotlight. So, developing a new belief that says, I'm good with the spotlight. I'm fine with the spotlight on me. I don't need a TV show necessarily, but I just need to think of myself as the author of my own life rather than it happening to me. The third fear, a lot of people get trapped because they don't want to move forward because they fear that that would be disloyal to or leave people behind that maybe don't want to grow with them or can't for some reason. So it's the idea that I need to keep from growing, otherwise I'll rock the boat. And that's a very common one that keeps people glued into the same unhappy life and doing things over and over and over again that don't bring satisfaction. A fourth fear is a lot of people are really afraid of the burden of if they have more success, for example, if they have more money, if they have more love. It's the idea that there's something wrong with having more because it will bring a burden with it. And so, and I've talked to so many people with that particular problem, and I'll find out where'd you get that idea? Where'd you first come in contact with that idea? And it always comes down to, oh, my dad was super successful, but every day he would come in the door and say, "Honey, mix me my martini. They killed me today at the office," and everything was greeted with this kind of burdensome tone. And so a lot of times people keep themselves limited because they're afraid that more growth means more burden. So those are the main ones that really keep people stuck. And particularly keep an eye on that first one, though, because so many people, even if you only have a percent of that, it can really slow you down. The idea that for some reason, I'm not entitled to the good things of life. And so the moment you make a shift there and say, okay, I'm willing to experience fully being loved, I'm willing to experience full loving, I'm willing to experience being fully the star of my own life. So, those moments of installing a new unlimiting belief, it's the magic that I've lived on for 50 years because I get to see people doing that all the time. And then I get to see their lives change as a result. I always say I have the best inbox in town because people send me examples of their big leaps they've taken in their life, or the business they started, or the new relationship and everything. And so one day I hope to get about 1,500 or so of those. I want to publish a book of all those just to show people what's available.
That's amazing. And as you're talking, this stuff, I've done a lot of work around, much of this stuff over the last couple of years. And so with me personally, it really resonates. And I'm wondering, because I've done work around this and I know how difficult it can be to even identify that you have any of these fears or that you're hitting an upper limit problem, how can, like, if my audience is listening and they're like, man, I wonder which one of these things I fall into, or, if I'm self-sabotaging in some way, how can they begin to identify some of this stuff on their own? Is that possible?
Yes. Well, one big thing, since all upper limit problems are rooted in a fear of some sort, make friends with your fear. It's one of the best things a grown up can do is really get on intimate terms. Notice when you're feeling fear and anxiety in your body. That's a starting place. Learn how to do a body scan of yourself and ask yourself, am I feeling angry? Am I feeling scared? Am I feeling sad? Those are the basic three emotions that people trip over. They can't communicate them very easily, and they're not sometimes easy to find inside, because if you've been anxious your whole life, you don't even know you're anxious. You just think that's the way the world is because you don't have anything to compare it to. So when anxious people come in here, for example, I don't try to make them less anxious the first day. I simply ask them to be in touch with where they're feeling it in their body and notice that they actually can make it bigger or smaller by how they breathe. And so once people learn how to breathe, for example, in a way that makes your anxiety go away, you kind of say, oh, wow, my anxiety doesn't have a grip on me. I have anxiety, but I know how to make it come and go. And so what we want to do is empower people with natural means of clearing up their anxiety and fear, or clearing up their grief and sadness, or clearing up their old rage and anger. So there are nice, easygoing, friendly ways to do that. And then there are probably less friendly ways, but what we want to do is teach people how to, in a gentle way, contact who you really are, how you really feel, and what you're really, the essence of what your life is all about, which I believe is the quest for this thing I'm calling genius, this magical life where you're doing what you love to do and you're getting a major reward out of it.
Oh, that's
You may see
interesting.
me smile if you're watching this on TV. One of my cats just came in and put her feet up on my knee and gave me a little massage with her feet. And she's kind of a camera ham, so don't be surprised if she comes and sticks her face on our camera today.
Oh, there you go. We got room for another guest appearance. Not a problem at all. Well, that's really insightful. Okay, I want to get into that zone of genius stuff. One more question on the upper limit problem before we get into that. And I'm sure some of this will probably gel together. But if somebody, okay, let's say somebody identifies their fear, right? And they've been able to identify the anxiety or, the fear of being flawed or leaving people behind or whatever one of these is. The next step is this upper limit problem. How do they identify that? You mentioned getting sick or stubbing your toe, but what else is there? Because that's not obvious, not unless they've read the book, they've done the work, maybe listened to the end of this podcast. But what else is there that they can recognize that says to them, you're sabotaging yourself?
Probably the easiest thing to notice, Josh, is worry thoughts. And I recommend that every human being spend a day or two just observing your worry thoughts. Notice when you have them, what they're about. Particularly notice how many of them are about the past and how many of them are about the future. Because those two things, the past and the future, have something in common. And that thing they have in common is both of them are unchangeable. They're outside our control. They cannot be managed. And so what you do with that is look for the fear that's driving all those thoughts about nothing you can do anything about. Because, if you go back 2,000 years, there was what I probably would say is humankind's first self-help book. It was by a philosopher named Epictetus, who lived roughly around the same time in Greece and Rome as Jesus was living over in Palestine and Israel. But Epictetus didn't write a book, but his students collected the things he said and put them into a little book called the Enchiridion, which sort of means the manual about the art of living, the manual of living. And the first line of it, if you didn't read anything else in your life, would change your life, because it says that the secret of happiness is knowing that there are some things you can control and some things you cannot control. So it was the birthplace of what is now the Serenity Prayer that's said in AA groups and other groups, 12-step groups, the idea of letting go of trying to control the things that you don't have any control over anyway, and putting your attention on very simple things like, have I had a drink today? Or can I get out of my bed today and go give the speech instead of having a sore throat? So those kind of moments make a breakthrough through the upper limits problems. Like, for example, I work with a lot of CEOs, and I have a woman who's a CEO of a big company, and she finds it very easy to talk to 12 people in a boardroom. I mean, she can be just brilliant. But this new job she has requires her to get up on a big screen thing in front of 12,000 people that work for her company around the world and give those kind of talks too. And she's always had a fear of that kind of public speaking. So, for example, I was working with her, and one thing I do with people who has a fear of public speaking is we work on the roots of it, of course, but I also send them to practice groups like Toastmasters and things like that, so they can just give a 1-minute speech every week. And so just get used to doing that. But the thing that we were working on, she's always had illness as her upper limit problem. Something good will happen, she'll have to go to bed for 3 days. Something good will happen, she'll get a big raise or a promotion, she'll hurt herself getting out of her car, strain her back. So we worked on that. And so she had her big presentation, 12,000 people around the world going to be watching her on television, giving the big speech of the year and all of that. And she woke up that morning with a real sore throat and a case of laryngitis. And so fortunately, these people all have my cell phone number, God bless them, and they don't hesitate to use that sometimes. But she called me very early in the morning. I got this sore throat, So I worked with her for a little while on feeling the fear underneath it, which she'd worked with 100 times, but here it was coming up just right in the middle of things. And so we spent 10 or 15 minutes learning how to feel her fear and get comfortable with it and be able to walk out on the stage and say, boy, you wouldn't believe how anxious I'm feeling inside right now. To be able to break the ice with something that everybody on earth has felt. And as a result of that, she walked out on that stage a couple hours later, 0 sore throat, 0 laryngitis. And I'm not saying that everything can always be cured by things like that, but just to give you an example, once I figured this stuff out 30 years ago, I haven't had a cold or the flu in 30 years because I noticed the early symptoms of it and then take care of it right there. I adjust my breathing, take a few vitamin C's, lie down, feel it thoroughly. And as a result of that, it doesn't get a grip on me. So I think that each of us has a lot more power over our physical well-being as well as our mental well-being than we think we do.
That's amazing. I really appreciate you kind of walking us through that a little bit. And I really appreciate the references too. I'm a big Stoic philosophy buff. So Epictetus and Seneca and Marcus Aurelius meditation. I mean, I'm a big fan of all of that. And that's a common theme, right, in the Stoic practice from Epictetus, because he was, the one that really put it forth was, worry about what you can control and don't what you can't. I'd like to there was one thing that you said about what the past and the future have in common, and you said both are unchangeable. And what would you say to somebody that says, well, the future, I can change the future by what I do now? What kind of relevance is there to that? Or what do you mean by it's unchangeable?
Well, you can't do anything about it.
Got it.
You can only do something about it in the present. For example, if you're thinking of something in the future and you've got anxiety in your body, what you got to do is do something about the anxiety. You can't do anything about the thing you're thinking about in the future because I'm sure everybody is aware, the chances of the future turning out how you have imagined it, for better or for worse, is infinitesimal. It's very unlikely that tomorrow, even if you plan it down to the minute, is going to turn out like it. And I remember when my daughter was little, my wife went to for an extended period to Europe, and I had to suddenly take over as chief cook and teeth brush supervisor and a whole bunch of things I hadn't been doing. And boy, it was really amazing learning how to do something brand new that I'd never done before. But it's exhilarating, but it can also be very scary. The important thing, though, is to take your attention off the past and put it in what you're feeling in your body right now. Take your attention off the future and put it on what's the fear you're feeling. Is it a fear of rejection? Well, that's useful to know. Is it a fear of losing your marbles while you're talking? Some people get, their mind goes blank, and that's their big fear. So inquire into it. Wonder about it. Wonder is the great unused superpower that human beings have, is the opportunity to genuinely, sincerely, open-heartedly wonder about stuff. Why is it that I'm feeling anxious right now? Or, what is it I've been avoiding about talking to my father? Or, what is it the source of this anger I feel? Those moments of wonder where you use that superpower, people are amazed at the power of that because sometimes, I mean, I've had people figure out something in 10 seconds that they has been bugging them for years because they've never actually genuinely and sincerely wondered about it. See, the nice thing about wonder is it's unpredictable. You can't say, I want to wonder about lunch and make sure I have a hamburger. Wonder is open-minded, it's open-hearted, it's uncontrollable. And that's why I believe that wonder is one of those superpowers that if you can harness it and get to working for you, you can turn on creativity in yourself that you didn't know you had. Like I did it myself, so I know it can be done. I've up until 2012, I'd never written a novel before. I'd written a couple of dozen self-help books and some very successful ones that are world famous, but I'd always had this itch to write a novel. And I had this belief that I didn't know how to do it because my hero was Sherlock Holmes and I knew I wasn't in that league, so why bother to write a mystery? But I wanted to write a mystery. And so I realized one day I don't have to write a whole mystery. I need to write a paragraph that makes me chuckle inside. Then I need to write a second paragraph that makes me chuckle inside. And then I need to write a whole chapter that makes me think, wow, that tells a good story. So here I am. I've published 9 novels, and I have 6 more in the pipeline. And I didn't even start writing them until I was in my 60s. So don't ever let anybody tell you you're too old or too limited or not smart enough or whatever. Just get in there and find out what is it that you love and how can I make that happen all day long.
I love that. That's a perfect transition into the difference between zone of excellence and zone of genius. So can we talk a little bit about that? I mean, it sounds like what you just described was you operating in your zone of genius. But what's the difference between zone of excellence and zone of genius, and how can you recognize where you're at?
The zone of excellence sounds really good, and it is really good up until a point. The zone of excellence is when you're doing things you're good at. And you're good at them because people give you money for doing them or appreciate you doing it or pat on the back or whatever it is. I think that so many of us go for the wrong kind of rewards. Who is it? Somebody famous said that they spent 50 years climbing the ladder only to realize they had it leaning against the wrong wall. And so the zone of excellence is you're doing stuff you're good at, you get paid well for it, you get a lot of atta-girls and atta-boys, but it's not ultimately satisfying. But the problem is it's pretty darn addictive because in your zone of excellence, other people like it. They want you to be there. Like my friend that was the biggest real estate developer in the Caribbean until Hurricane Hugo flattened his projects. I mean, literally flattened several of his major projects. And so he said, I asked him years later, what was the hardest part about suddenly not having what you had before? And he said, you know what the hardest part was? Listening to my kids complain about not being able to fly first class anymore. and he said that really bugged me, that I'd never flown first class, and then I was flying first class, so my kids got to first class. Now they're complaining because they have to sit in coach, So what has my life been about? So if you plug all of your good well-being into how other people feel about you or think about you or how they appreciate, you're bound to have a collapse of that at some point, because life is not about achievement. It's about the resolution of certain inner things so that we can experience the good things of life. The good things of life, the best thing that we know so far on our planet, is the free and easy exchange of love and harmony with one or more human beings. And I feel grievously sad about this, but I've been around the world now more than 30 times, and I can tell you that most people in the world are not experiencing the free and easy flow of love in their lives. And I want to change that. The other thing I've noticed in my travels is that very few people are really content with what they're doing, what their life is all about. I meet people all the time that says, oh gosh, like, I've gotten to be the CEO of this Fortune 50 company, and yet I feel like if I died tomorrow, my life would be a failure. Well, what are they talking about? They're talking about the difference between the zone of excellence and the zone of genius, because when you're in the zone of excellence, there's that yearning to express your genius, but you haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. If you can do that, your life becomes radiant, because then you're the CEO and you're opening up all of these other frontiers in yourself at the same time. And I remember walking down the hall with a CEO of a big company out in the Midwest, and I was talking to him about, I wondered out loud. I said, how long has it been since you've just taken 10 minutes to yourself to figure out, what is my genius? Am I doing what I love to do? And how could I learn to love it and do what I love more? And he said, we're walking down the hall, and he said, oh man, if I ever had 10 minutes to do that, if I could put together 10 minutes to do that, that would really change everything. I said, stop. Let's walk back to your office. And we sat down in his office, and that's what we did. I said, let's close our eyes, sit quietly, breathe, and simply ask yourself, what do I most love to do here? And how could I do it more? Wow. He didn't even need 10 minutes of this. It was more like 3 minutes. Suddenly he was saying, oh my gosh, I realized there's this whole open frontier I could be going into. So, those are such beautiful moments. And I feel so blessed because I've been sitting on the front seat of many thousands of them by now. It's a very rewarding thing to be able to see somebody open up their zone of genius right in front of your eyes.
I can only imagine how rewarding and how fulfilling that must be, just knowing how much I love to see light bulbs go off when I help somebody, come up with an idea or break through something small, not even close to what the zone of genius might be. So my next question in that is, I have to imagine, especially based on some of the stuff you just said, that a lot of times leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs probably identify with their zone of excellence. They form an identity around it. So how can we start to unwind that identity from what they're good at, but might no longer be fulfilled by? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. I keep coming back to people getting more sensitive with your body, because, your body has been around for millions of years, perfecting things like feelings and sensations. And yet you can see in modern life how people get led away from knowing the truth of what their bodies are trying to tell them. Like 125 years ago, the average American ate less than a pound of sugar a year. The modern American, the 2025 version, average eats more than 100 pounds of sugar a year. And
Wow.
That is something that no body can keep up with, because your body has been used for millions of years to living on nuts and fruits and things like that.
Yeah.
And occasionally, most of the time, it's been eating rice and beans and things that grow in the forest and bananas and things like that. It's only been recently that we've been able to eat a variety of foods. And here we are pouring in 100 pounds of sugar. Whoa. So you're being taken away from what your body can organically let you know. So now we have 150 different pills to make your anxiety go away. But what happens when your anxiety doesn't go away eventually? One of my clients that I work with now, a very, very successful person, was taking more than 50 Oxycontins a day to support his lifestyle.
Wow.
And eventually, your body's just not going to be able to take that anymore. And so he had to learn to wean off the medications and face his feelings and his fears and his pain by himself. And fortunately, he's learned how to do that now years later. And so he's become a master of knowing what's going on in himself. He can tell the difference, for example, between being scared, anxious, and being hungry. Nature has kind of thrown a curveball to us because it's put our hunger sensations right next to our fear sensations. So a lot of people eat when they're actually scared or anxious. And it never works, of course, because if you just put in food on top of anxiety, your body's not digesting food when it's anxious. And so it'll sit there in the middle of your body and just feel like a big lump. So we need to learn how to really be in touch with what we're feeling, what our aspirations are. This thing I keep returning to about genius is really simple if you just break it down into what do you really love to do? That, like if you think about your work that you're doing right now, what is it about it that you most love? Josh, you've obviously found your genius zone and are beginning, probably 10 years ago, if I'd asked you, do you imagine that you're going to be doing a popular podcast on the subject of X, Y, and Z? You would have said, what?
Not a chance. Not a chance.
Yeah, not a chance. And neither would I. I mean, if you look at me now, if you looked at me 50 years ago, you would have seen a person with a completely different body. I was tremendously overweight. I wore a pair of big, thick glasses. I smoked heavily, 2 or 3 packs of Marlboros a day when I was in my early 20s. Thank goodness I woke up when I was 24 and began to change my life, because I sure wouldn't have been here, I don't think, as long as I've been around, if I hadn't made some major corrections in my life.
Yeah. No, I really, truly appreciate this conversation. I want to be respectful of your time. I know we got about 10 minutes left. I got 2 more questions for you. So we've been talking about the zone of genius. There's a word that has been coming up quite a bit. And you said it a couple minutes ago. Most people aren't experiencing free and easy love and harmony. You talked about the zone of genius being doing what you love, what you love to do. So I'm curious, especially for the listeners of this show, what's the connection between love and leadership that most people miss?
Well, the beautiful leaders I've met, and I've met some of the most beautiful leaders on the planet. I had the pleasure of consulting for a number of years down at Dell Computer and working with Michael and his team. And I worked for many years with Motorola and a few other big companies like that. And one of the things, I think the great leaders come from a place of love. And leaders who aren't great, there are things about themselves that they haven't learned to love yet that are keeping them from the type of greatness that they could possibly be. And so I think of some of the people that I've had the pleasures of walking the halls with, both in America and in Europe, and to a certain extent in Asia too, but I haven't done as much work there as I have in North America and Europe. I think that I have met more genuinely spiritual people in the halls of corporations than I've met in the various monasteries and holy places I've visited over the years. And the reason I say that is because if you're successful in business, you have to have a certain resonance with other people and a certain ability to tune in to who other people are and what their genius could be. And you can only get there by doing that with yourself. You can't ever do for other people what you haven't been able to do for yourself. And so if you have made inquiries into your own genius and found out what your biggest contribution is, then you can see that with X-ray vision, or I would say heart assisted vision of who people really are. And I was just grieving and celebrating the loss of Bob Shapiro, who was the head of Monsanto for a number of years, and just an amazing executive that I had the pleasure of working with. And he passed away a month or so ago, and I was going through his memorial service because I wasn't able to attend. It was out in Chicago. But so many people spoke not to his brilliance of his mind, where it was insanely brilliant, but also to the bigness of his heart and the way he had opened up possibilities for other people. And I'm an old guy now. I'm 80, and and so I've been around the deathbeds of more than one person I know. And I can tell you just flat out that people are not talking about how much money they've made or how they've climbed the ladder of life when they're on their deathbeds. I had the great experience of being with my dear friend Jim Selman, my golf buddy of 20 years that I played hundreds of rounds of golf with. He passed away on December 29th, and I had the opportunity to go over at Christmas and be with him and spend some of the last days and hours of his life with him. And I was so deeply moved by, he had spent his lifetime helping other people and, was a great therapist and business consultant and things like that. And how open he was and how, he said, this is it, and I'm leaving and I want to leave everything behind here, and when he was lucid, those were the kind of things he was talking about. And so you're a long way from your deathbed. I'm hopefully a few years away from mine, but whenever it comes, I want to be able to say, I used myself up completely. I gave everything. I left it all on the field. That's what my old high school coach, leave it on the field, don't save it for your girlfriend at the dance afterwards, put it on the field.
Yeah.
And your girlfriend may leave you for another man afterwards. He was a salty old cuss. Whitey Smith was his name. But he had a lot of wisdom to him, too. But his point was commitment is where it's at, fellows. There's a big difference between on the bench and on the field. And if you're on the field, and we all are, once we're learning to walk around in the world, we've got to be able to give it our all, to come from a place of loving, unconditional commitment.
I love that answer. I truly do. I think that provides a lot of clarity and context and honestly direction, I think, for a lot of people, especially leaders out there listening. So that'll lead us into our last question, Gay, and then I'll let you go. I love to ask this question. I get a variety of responses, but it really speaks to the essence of the show and why we do this. But I'm curious, what is a truth that took you years to fully understand, but changed everything once you finally did?
Beautiful question. I would say it has to do a lot with commitment. That it took me a long time, particularly in my relationships, until I met my wife, Katie, when I was 34 years old. I'd had a number of different relationships in my teens and 20s, but I didn't realize until shortly before I met Katie, that I was never really committed to any of them. I always had kind of one foot out the back door, that I was already in the process of leaving before I got there. And that was just an old life pattern of mine that I needed to take a look at how much of my life I'd spent running away from things and never really letting myself really experience them. And finally, I started doing that in my 30s, letting myself really feel myself and tune into my genius and all the things that you and I have been talking about, Josh. And as I started doing that, wow, life became so much more effortless in a way, that once I decided to choose being where I was and to choose doing what I was doing and to realize that I was the one that was doing it, not somebody else making me do it. But even if it looked like they were hiring me and paying me to do it, I was the one that was in charge of actually being committed to it or not. And that took me so long to figure out. But boy, did it come in handy in my relationship, well, all my relationships, but especially for the past 45 years that I've been with Katie. Just every time any subject comes up, I look at, I must have been committed to that, because it's our unconscious commitments that cause our problems, not our conscious commitments. Yeah. And it's the unconscious commitments to get punished, the unconscious commitment to get rejected. All of those kind of things get in the way. But when you start fleshing out your conscious commitments, wow, life becomes the smooth, effortless journey it was always trying to be.
I love that. What a great place to stop there. Gay, any final thoughts, or where can people find you or learn more?
Well, we have a couple of great websites. We have had Hendricks.com for 30 years now, HENDRICKS.com. That's kind of the main place where you can find out all the samples of our work. We also have another one that's our nonprofit foundation called the Foundation for Conscious Living. And there's a lot of videos and free materials and things like that. One thing I did want to mention, I'm big on learning how to use the best technology around for things. Like I love these video conference technologies because I can sit here in my beautiful office that I've spent half my life making beautiful, and I can sit here and give a keynote to a room full of people in Rochester, New York, and so I love the latest. And the latest technology, AI, I've spent the summer with an AI team developing a new AI-assisted coaches portal. And so if you go to Hendricks.com, you can find out all about the coaches portal. Go in and check it out. You can get a little trial from it. And what it is, we took all of our training materials, like our proprietary 900-page training manual that we use, and we put it in our own AI. So you can get out to the big AI through our portal, but you can also get the stuff that you can't get out there in regular AI land. And so you can get all the Hendricks materials from our 45 years of training and 200 videos and all of those kind of things. Find out the answers to any clinical or consulting related questions that you might have. What should I do with my first session with my anxious client? Or I have a couple coming in that fights about sexuality. What do I do? So you can get answers in 30 seconds that it took me years to figure out. And I think that's one of the great advantages of the new technologies.
Amazing. What a day and age that we live in, huh? That's fantastic. Amazing. Well, Gay, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with me and with our audience. And I know for a fact that they're going to get a lot out of this. They're going to just eat this up. So thank you so much for everything that you've done, for the books that you've written, and for the knowledge and wisdom that you shared today.
My pleasure. Thank you for minding your zone of genius and expressing it in the world.
I do what I can because of you. Thank you.